We're going to start doing our topic for the night. We'll see who wanders in to hang out with us this evening, if anybody.
Great.
Because we always get a few people.
Yeah.
Um, oh, hey, Geeky, welcome to the chat. Good to have you along tonight. You got here right at the top of the show because I'm literally on the way to introduce someone who is not Amy Reinhold, but is instead Heidi Chapman of the, you have the impressive title. You have the honor of sharing it.
Okay. Well, so Amy Reinbold is the person I bought the computer from, just to clear that up, when I was in college. My name is Heidi Chapman, and I'm the executive director of the Frankemuth Historical Association that is located in Frankemuth, Michigan.
That is a good title. I'm going to do you a solid. There we go. And now the right name will show.
Thank you.
Happy to. And I asked Heidi to hang out with me tonight because, as an expert in Frankenmuth history, you are also kind of an expert in one of Michigan's frontier towns.
I am. Yeah, Frankemuth was first settled in 1845, just a couple years after Saginaw and Tuscola area, and we're one of the main towns that are still around and still actually a city in our especially closer areas. And we're thriving. Got a lot of about 3 million tourists a year, and we're very proud to call ourselves Michigan's Little Bavaria.
It's a great little town. So we consider it one of our destinations when we're thinking, where do we want to go for any kind of vacation? It's neat to have a vacation town less than an hour and a half drive away.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I grew up in Frankemuth, so um, for me it's a little overrated. But there are those. Yeah, I know. But there are those weekends and those times when it's just great, and it's great to come into town and wear your dirndl or lederhosen and not have strange looks, not have people give you strange looks because you just fit in with everybody else. So it's always interesting.
It's part of the fun. So, and then one of the things we like to do is I asked Heidi on because I'm a huge fan of Red Dead Redemption, which is the game that this is technically streaming under. But I'm a history nerd. And so one of the questions I'm always going after, and as we talked before, is how much of what we have here in the game jives with reality? How much are we seeing history and how much are we seeing Hollywood? Or in this case, Silicon Valley. And so I thought it'd be kind of fun is to see if maybe we can wander around and if you could talk us through some of the growth of a city like Frankenmuth and how it matches up with some of the cities that we can see growing here
Hmm.
and talk about what Frankenmuth looked like at those times.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Frankenmuth has a pretty unique history. Like I mentioned, started in, I guess, do you mind if I go ahead with
Please,
a quick
knock it
history?
off.
So started in 1845 with a group of about 15 German settlers, all fairly young. There was one young family, and all the rest were either single or just newly married, like on the ship to come over from Germany, from the US. Germany had pretty strict laws at the time. Marriage laws, for example, you couldn't get married unless you had a certain amount of land, certain amount of education. And with the people that came over were fairly poor, so they didn't, they couldn't buy that land. If So they got married on the ship once they were in the harbor, and then they came over as newlyweds. Um,
It's a
so
heck of a
uh,
honeymoon.
yeah, right. It took them about 53 days to come over on the Caroline, which was their ship. And in the meantime, they ran into another ship. They had bad storms. There was a smallpox outbreak. Their drunken captain ran into another ship. They ran aground for a hot minute there. So they had quite a journey. But so basically, they came up around like Lake Huron, and then down in the Thumb, and then came I guess upriver through Bay City. Stayed in Saginaw for a while, and then August 18th, 1845 is the day that they actually walked over to Frankemuth. So we just celebrated our 175th anniversary, and then from there they created a town, and it looks obviously way different. All forests back then, so they worked for the first 20 years clearing fields. It took them maybe 5 years to clear 4 acres, which today seems crazy, but back then was obviously a lot different.
Well, we
Um,
kind of speed things up these days.
a little bit, yeah. Um,
So to clarify, when they're coming over, did they like stop anywhere on the way, or was this a one boat all the way from Germany all the way through, and they just kept sailing and sailing and sailing.
So they landed in New York, where then they took a train up to Buffalo, I
Okay.
believe, and then took like a steamboat through Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and Lake Erie, and then they stopped in like in the harbor of Detroit for a couple days. That happened to be the 4th of July, so the captain like parked his ship. He anchored his ship in kind of by Detroit there, went off the ship to celebrate 4th of July. And these German people, keep in mind, they didn't speak English, so they had no idea what was going on. They had no idea why they were stopping. All they could hear were fireworks and crazy things happening. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure they were freaked out. So they stayed in Detroit for a couple days and then went up Lake Huron around the Thumb and then
Okay.
Bay City and then Saginaw. So
It's still a pretty intense journey, and again with that language barrier of not really knowing like what's going on, plus lack of the cultural knowledge. I mean,
oh, of course, yeah, and they were dressed, differently than people in New York dress. So they already beyond the language, they already looked different. So I can't imagine, how scary that might have been at first. So,
that's a definite culture shock.
yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, then why don't we let's go head out west for a bit here. I'm going
Okay,
to switch screens over so that you can ride along, and we're going to drop into one of the what I think is an older town over here. I'll actually give you some sound with it. Boink. And there we go. So this is our window into the world. This is Siobhan.
hmm,
She is an Irish Catholic from New York.
okay,
That's as much of the backstory as I've written for her so far. About a month ago, I had a friend on to critique her clothing for 1890. I received a C minus for
oh,
the way I have attired her.
okay. A
Um,
little too soon, or too, is she outdated, or?
a little too much pants
Oh, okay,
was the concern.
okay.
A little too much shirt and a little too much boy.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but you want to be comfortable. I don't blame her. So,
I say, riding in a full skirt is not something that I would ever wish on anyone.
yeah, I'm
Um,
sure.
I don't even know why I did that because we're only going over to this fast travel point
Mm,
because we're gonna take advantage of some of the game mechanics to get where we want to go fast.
all
We're
right.
gonna drop into a little town called Strawberry, and so I guess my question is, if this was Frankenmuth, about what year would we be visiting?
Okay.
Because in the game terms, this is all happening in 1899,
Mhm.
but so many locations are set to be, as near as I can tell, different phases of the settling of the West.
Okay.
Which it's still weird to think about Michigan as being the West, but once you get north of Detroit, it can get pretty frontiery even today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, north of, Mount Pleasant, it's lots of woods and that's about it. So,
So this will be Strawberry. It's a small town.
okay.
It does not yet have a church built.
Oh, okay.
So when we were talking, I was talking earlier with the pastor, and he said, "Well, some of these towns would probably have a tent for that." It features one general store
Okay.
and a pretty good number of boarding houses.
Okay.
That's about all it has going for it.
That's a pretty small town. So, Frankemuth compared to Frankemuth, I can tell you a lot of differences right now.
Okay.
The first thing settlers did in 1845 was build a church. That was the reason they came over to Michigan, was to get away. Part of it was to get away from the strict laws in Germany, but the other big half of it was to spread the word of God to Indians, the local Native Americans that were in that area. By the time they got there, a lot of them had already moved away, so they were a little late. But so church, and then one general store. So I believe by the turn of the century, when 1900 came along, Frankenmuth had like maybe 4 or 5 general stores, and all of them had something just a little different from each other, so they didn't compete too much. Uh, However, as far as the hotels and the boarding houses, that's pretty spot on. Again, by the turn of the century, Frankenmuth had 6 hotels/boarding houses.
What,
Um,
now, was that because it was a location people were traveling through and needed lodging, or was that because it was already emerging as a hub of activity that people wanted to lodge at?
Um, Mostly it was people passing through. So the main cities during that time period were Flint, Saginaw, and Bay City, and Frankemuth was kind of in between. So it was like an 8-hour walk from Saginaw to Frankemuth. Well, that's pretty much a day. So if you're traveling anywhere other than, if you're traveling to Flint or whatever, you'd want to stay on a main road, which from Saginaw to Frankemuth, that did have one, or Bridgeport from Frankemuth, I should say. And then you could make your way to Flint the next day. So you could board yourself, your horse, and then get a meal for about 75 cents a day at the Exchange Hotel, which later turned into Zender's. So that really wasn't too bad of a deal. And they even at that point already, fairly early on, they were selling chicken dinners, and it was all you can eat kind of thing. That's continued.
So that's like right in 1900.
Yeah, or even a little earlier than that. I mean, 1880s is when the general stores kind of popped up in the area. The earliest one being 1857, I think,
Okay.
which is currently right where downtown Frankenmuth is located today.
Wow. That makes some sense.
Mm-hmm.
My mind kind of popped when you say it's an 8-hour walk to Bridgeport, because my next thought was, well, I mean, you're traveling, you're not going to walk.
Yeah.
And then my next thought was, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, you kind of do.
We had no other choice. Yeah, and we have all kinds of stories of people going and they never made it back because bears or who knows what else, elements, things like that. So
Yeah.
that was a serious thing.
Well, even in the virtual world, we have to deal with bears. I have
Sure.
lots of video clips of my better half stumbling into a bear and going, "Oh, I found a bear. I'm going to take a picture," and then she's dead. Which is a whole different story. I have to get into at some point. They decided in this game to add a naturalist role, so you're going around in the 1890s trying to take pictures of animals.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
which-
that's so I do see that they have like side like it's not log framed, like that hotel that we're looking at there. It's clapboard siding. So that hotel, I mean, there must be a lumber boom in this area.
Well, if we turn around a bit, yep,
But that makes sense.
lots of tall trees.
So they must have a mill, I'm assuming. That was one of Frankenmuth's first businesses, was a mill.
Jog
Again,
over.
1853, I believe. And there, oh yes, there it is. There it is.
Yeah, it's oddly enough, it's underneath. It's attached to the general store of all places.
Okay,
So it seems to be a combined business, which
sure.
I'm thinking whoever thought the name Strawberry is the same guy that owns the general store and the mill.
Okay.
That's my gut.
Quite a unique name.
Well, I mean, they all have some fun names. But
Sure.
my read is that's where the money in town lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that. Um,
So this
yeah,
would,
the mill was one of the first, like I said, the first businesses that started in Frankenmuth. But the story is that the saw was so slow, so the guys would put the board on, let it saw through, but it was so slow that they would go outside and go fishing. And then when the board was done, they'd come back in, turn the board over, and go back outside and go fishing because it was right next to the river. So
that doesn't strike me as the most efficient thing to pay people to do.
no, but long time ago. So
That sounds about right. So we're
yeah,
we're definitely, this has some accurate things that we would expect.
yeah,
And this is maybe like a Frankenmuth 1860-ish.
yeah. I would easily say that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I keep waiting for the day they say they're gonna add the automobile in here, just to really kick
I
us up
was
a few
wondering
steps.
if there'd be one at all, but
Well, our next stop, as I work my way up through what I think are the various tiers of history here,
okay.
is a little town called Valentine, and it has a train station in it.
Oh, okay.
And welcome aboard, Scott. Glad to have you hanging out with us this evening as we talk a little bit of history with my friend. And Valentine has, and I think we've touched on the pre-show, this one might fit a little more with what we see with Frankenmuth because of where they built their church.
Okay. Okay.
This town is big enough I actually need my horse because we're now into that realm of some space.
Sure.
There's Mr. Sherman. I figure a redhead's going to name her horse after a famous general,
Of course.
also of red hair. Never trust redheads. We're scary. So this would be the thriving metropolis known as Strawberry. And there's
Okay.
the aforementioned church.
Okay. Okay. That looks.
I'll give you a better
Yeah,
view of
I
that.
mean, Frankemuth is their main church, St. Lawrence. First built as a log cabin, and then as time went on, they were able to build a brick structure in the 1860s, I believe, 1868, I think. So, but you know, that's about the size that you know that looks right. The size that they should have for a town that size, I would think.
Cool. And it's it seems to be kind of a focal point. It's up on a nice hill.
Yep.
Everyone gets to see it. The main street leads right to it. There's no missing it.
Sure. And again, German, the way that a lot of German towns were built back then was the church was in the center and everything else kind of went around it. And Frankemuth ended up not having that. Now the church is kind of on the outskirts of town as the town developed, but that was the original goal. Was the church was in the center, and that was that.
So was that just a case then of norms shifted or the economy shifted?
It was the economy. So that mill that I mentioned was maybe about a mile upriver, and then that's where the rest of the town developed because that's where everybody had to go. That's where the businesses started, and that's just what happened. So
Yeah. All right, that makes some sense. And when you see that kind of happen, that could happen here. If you look at the way this town's growing, it's moving out and away from that point.
Yep.
So over time, maybe this will shift away from that particular church if it's allowed to keep going. We've got a lot more construction going on. We still have that clapboard.
Yep.
So
I see. Are those like electricity poles?
those are, I think there's a light right there.
Okay.
They're wired for electric light,
Interesting.
which definitely does take us where, we references a true time period.
Yeah.
So if we were to, overlook the lights, we might say this is still along that road pre-1900.
Yes, I would think so. Like Frankemuth, for example, they didn't have the option to have electricity until 1904. And even then it was only the city that allowed it, and even then a lot of people turned it down at first because they were worried it was going to burn their house down. But then the outskirts, the farms on the very out parts of town, they didn't get electricity till the 30s, mid to late 30s.
Jeez. And
So,
and we
yeah.
all go crazy when the internet quits.
Right. Yeah.
Good old Scott mentions good old whale oil. And that is one of the fun things about, and this I think is consistent, if I can delve a little bit into science history, is that science has always fought with public perception, because I can't imagine people thinking it's more dangerous to have an electric wire come into your house than to have a large bladder of whale oil sitting
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
Like somewhere somebody thought, no, I don't want that new electricity thingy that makes it light at night. I'm going to keep burning things that could burn down my house if I kick it too hard.
Absolutely. Or a woman, with a dress on would walk by, and I mean, we have church records of all that. Women and children so often dying of burns. But some new things are often scary. So
Or kerosene or whatever they had handy
yeah,
for burning.
absolutely.
There's a lot of that.
Another thing I noticed is just dirt road. It's very muddy.
Yep.
Again, Frankemuth got a plank road. Oh, let me think here. Oh, maybe it was late 1880s, I believe.
Okay.
But it never worked well because for how swampy our area is, it would get wet and then it'd dry, and then it'd get wet and then it would dry. So they often call it a corduroy road, and you can imagine corduroy, very very bumpy like that, zigzaggy almost. So it didn't go super well. But I believe the first paved road came by in 1913, which was right after Detroit got their first paved road, which I believe was the first paved road in the country.
It is the famous mile down in Detroit of M1 or Woodward Avenue.
Yep.
Has the signage and everything to say this was where we started to pave. We started to pave paradise and put in a parking lot. Sorry,
Yeah.
that one
So
had to get
I guess
done.
I'm surprised to see a dirt road and then also electricity, but that's some things are more important than others.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the storyline for the game at large is tied to that transition with the electric light. But they also, I think, envision this as being far enough on the frontier that the energy to pave isn't there yet.
Sure.
Which we're going to kind of keep working our way up through, kind of through Frankemuth history, but by way of all the other ones.
Okay.
Our next little stop, it's one of my favorite towns that's in here, and that's a little town called Blackwater.
Right.
This was actually when I first brought Siobhan into the game. I first made her as a character. This is where the game threw me. And so I've always kind of thought of that as her like home in the West. When I'm
Okay.
working on her storyline and thinking like what makes her do what she does. This is where I kind of fall back to as my place. And it's a big jump up from Valentine. If it'll finish loading. Please don't disconnect. Please don't disconnect. Okay, good.
There we go.
Oh, I couldn't have done this 2 months ago. The network issues with this game were so bad that there was no guarantee we would get through more than 20 minutes without the game kicking me out, and we're just
Oh, really?
talking at each other then. So, but yes, this is Blackwater, which we have the dirt road here
Okay.
and sheriff's office, and we can start to see the. Oop, watch the wagon. I'm too busy looking at the sights. But all brick 3-story. I think that's the
Okay.
hotel. I can't quite make out the
I
sign
think
from
it
this
did
angle.
say that on the side, I believe. Yeah.
Yep. Oh yeah, there it says in the paint. And then we have actual cobblestones. Actually, no, I think this is
Oh.
brick. Yeah, this is good old-fashioned brick paving.
Okay. Nice. Nice.
And then we have on this side of town, excuse me here, sir, we have a full playhouse.
Oh wow.
I know, ain't it pretty?
Yeah, and it's big. Interesting.
And then if we clip down a little bit, and we start to see that electric light and the technology come in.
Oh yeah, neon lights almost looks like. Oh no, light bulbs.
And
Wow.
there's a trick to getting that bright yellow. I remembered I studied this in chemistry, and in a second, I think Scott's going to correct me on this one because he's the resident chemist as to what you put in the light bulb to get that really bright orange. But then we actually have a playhouse, a full theater down over here for moving pictures.
Okay. See, Frankemuth never had anything like that. We had a theater house, which was for plays and things like that. The first building that you showed,
Mm-hmm.
and that was built in 1894 by Theodore Fisher, who was at the time owned what turned into the Bavarian Inn restaurant.
Oh, okay.
But it was I guess Frankemuth citizens weren't really a fan of it. They say that the place lacked moral decency because he held raffles and dances and medicine shows and just all really naughty stuff back then. So
That dancing thing.
yes,
The
that
kids will
was really
start
good
doing
stuff.
that, and then
Yep, and the story is the that we like to tell is the notorious Flint Party, which I believe was in the 1920s, I think, so quite after, but where there were dancing girls from Detroit and lots of alcohol involved and no good Frankemuther was there. Yeah, they all knew what was going on because they were looking in the windows, of course. So,
looking in the windows. That's
yeah,
that's what I would tell the wife if I was
absolutely.
going to a dance at the place of ill repute.
Yep. And ours, it still stands. Actually, the building is currently, it was moved, and now it's currently next to the historical museum, and we use it as a rental space for events and other things like that. But it's a wood structure. This one is much more grandiose and brick and a little much bigger. Ours is just a wood structure, and it's one simple room with a stage, and it does have a backstage now. But we did preserve it to make it look exactly the way it did in the 1890s when it was first built. So and Theodore Fisher was a Mason, so the Mason slogan is still above the stage. We kept that in German, of course.
Interesting.
Yeah, but again, because he was a Mason, he wasn't super oh, accepted into town, because Mason wasn't super Lutheran at the time, like the majority of the other rest of the Frankemuth was.
Got it. So he was one of those people.
Those people, but he was a businessman, and as much as people didn't appreciate his morals, they did business with him because he was a very influential person in the business world.
Now, was he in any way connected to the Masons in the Detroit area that would go on to build the famous Masonic Temple Theater down
that,
here?
that one I don't know, I'm not sure.
Okay. Because that's one that always blows my mind when they say, "Oh, it's coming to Detroit at the Masonic Temple," and I'm like, they're going to do when I was a kid, I was like, they're doing a concert in a church.
Yeah, yeah,
That's weird, but
yeah,
okay, I can
yeah,
see it.
whatever works.
And then I went to see. I think I saw Phantom at the Masonic, and I'm like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
get
we
it.
went to a wedding there a couple years ago. It's a beautiful building.
Oh God, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And seeing Phantom in that space was just because they had the full chandelier and they
Oh,
spared no
sure.
expense
Yeah.
to put that particular chandelier. And then what's I think interesting with this town is there's our downtown,
Okay.
and then we have to go
Very lit up.
past everything here, past a farmstead,
Mhm.
around the bend, and there we finally find our church,
There's a church.
which feels like it feels like a really good grounding point because almost every town's got one, at least.
Sure, and that makes sense. A lot of the settlers came over for religious freedom.
Hmm.
Um, that was just something really common. Um,
But this seems to have fallen the same trap that Frankemuth did to a degree, which is the commercial center went in a little too far away from the faith center,
sure.
and they were never able to quite bridge them up.
Yep. Yeah. But I mean, that I guess that did happen, but in Frank Muth's case, it didn't change any membership for the church. I mean, everybody still went to church on Sunday, and that's what you did. So,
So from Germany, they were mostly Lutherans. About
correct.
what time did you start to see other churches start to show up in town?
Well, there was another Lutheran church that actually split off from St. Lawrence, St. John's, and they're still around. But then other religions didn't start coming in until actually the 1960s. There was a Methodist church built, and then a Catholic church was built in the 1970s. And now today there's non there's I mean there's all those churches are still there, but today there's also non-denominational. There's non-believers who live in town. There's and that's it's very diversified now, which is good.
Well, I think that's part of how the history has played out. A lot of times these communities went up as a faith-based situation
Mhm.
because that was a common theme that brought them all together.
Yeah,
And it took a lot of time for people to feel comfortable with someone who thought differently.
absolutely.
Not
Yeah.
just having them come in, but going out too.
hmm
Like,
And that was actually in the original letters that we have, from the settlers who wrote back home to Germany. Their goal was to stay in their German bubble and stay as German as they can, all while being American citizens, of course. They were very proud American citizens. They fought in the Civil War and World War One and Two, but they tried very hard to remain as German in traditions and in language and in beliefs as possible.
what you see, I mean, the heritage is still very much there.
Oh, very
Um,
much.
and
Yeah,
it's
very much.
really neat to go through because there's so many neat. I mean, it's a bit of a commercialization, but I think it's a fun kind.
Yeah,
Because
it definitely is a commercialization. As you know, I'm German.
Mhm.
Again, as growing up here, some of the stuff that Frank Muth does, I roll my eyes at because it's just like that's not really how it is, but it really also very much is. It's still today. So
I never would have guessed with a name like Heidi that
yeah,
were German.
sure you
Um,
would.
well, I mean, I'm also my name comes from Germany. We're on the far side over by Austria, is where
Okay.
my family originally for the name comes down the line.
Yeah.
Um, but so there's where that ends up. This is like the last city stop on our tour.
Okay.
This is
That looks
actually
very developed.
meant to be fashioned after New Orleans.
Oh, okay, I can see that.
So it's the town's called Saint Denis
Okay.
or Saint Denis, and there's a lot of obviously New Orleans overtones.
Yeah.
But I thought it'd be worth popping into to point out a couple of the things that they get to enjoy that you don't
Mhm.
see anywhere else in the game. As much as I hate coming into here, because I feel like this is the least Old West in this whole game.
Yeah, it doesn't look very old. I mean, you're right. It does look like we're in New Orleans right now. I mean, if you would have told me that, I would have believed you.
But we've got electric light everywhere. We have paved roads. We have lots and lots. I mean, we have a pretty thriving downtown here.
Absolutely.
And then the middle of that thoroughfare is actually an electric trolley.
Okay.
You can see the wire for it, the
Mhm.
lines to power it. So based on kind of where we are with the population density, about where would we find Frankenmuth time wise?
So this is a little. This one's tricky. The city. So Frankemuth did have a trolley. Trolley. It
Oh,
was an interurban line, and that was put in 1907, I believe. And that ran um, from Bridgeport to, and then it also went into Saginaw and Bay City, and then
no.
also into Flint. And that stayed around till I believe the mid 20s when it was taken out because cars were,
Mm-hmm.
started coming up in Frankenmuth. But during that time, Frankenmuth didn't look like this too much. The I think the lights are throwing me off. I mean, yes, they did have electricity, but they didn't uh, flaunt it, I guess, as much as these places are. I mean, there's light bulbs on every building and signs and things like that. I don't think Frankenmuth quite had that. That's what's throwing me off.
That doesn't really fit with the German humility.
Yeah, not so much. Uh, Frankenmuth had paved roads by then. The main roads, at least, side roads were not yet. Um, I mean, I want to say, geez, almost 1920s,
Okay.
late teens even. Uh, but I don't think we had as much lights. We had a couple more cars. I don't see any vehicles. Um, the first car was around 1904, I believe, right around when the trolley was in. But people were pretty oh um, modest about them. They didn't really drive them around unless they needed to, because a lot of people made fun of them. There was one story that one of the first people in Frankenmuth that owned a car, his car broke down, and he towed it home with horses in the middle of the night so people wouldn't make fun of him. Um,
As cars often did, as they were,
yeah, oh,
emerging
absolutely.
technology.
Yeah, yeah. So this one again, I know, Old West, so I'm sure their cars didn't quite make it out that far quite yet.
Where I'm
But
going
yeah, I
here.
would I would almost say 1920s,
Okay.
early 20s.
And again, I think part of that too is when you work so hard to recreate a very specific area, it's hard to find analogs to others. I
Hmm.
mean, a vaudeville theater like that, I can imagine there is some city planner of Frankenmuth history rolling over in his grave at the thought of a vaudeville theater on Main Street.
Yeah, probably.
No, 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 we don't do that here.
Yeah, that would be my guess. That'd be my guess.
You can go down to Flint for that sort of thing.
Going to Saginaw, going to Tuscola. That was
In fact, while you're
the
in
ink.
Flint, just stay.
Yeah.
But all right, well, I'm gonna head back to camp for a bit.
Okay.
That was kind of our tour.
Okay.
Some interesting stop off. So I'm gonna go get to a place where we're not gonna get into any kind of trouble if we can avoid it. The first time I did one of these, I wanted to show how to play poker,
Okay.
and I went into one of the saloons and was getting ready to sit on the poker table, and another player decided he would just shoot her and kill her. And it's like, okay, I guess that's part of the game. But I'm thinking, I'm talking to my guests. We're getting ready to start teaching people how to play poker. And it's like,
Yeah.
got to run all the way back to the bar. Crap, he killed me again. All right, keep vamping, Rob. Keep vamping, keep vamping, keep vamping. All right, run back. And so that's been, yeah, there's a lot of neat stuff. And it sounds like the artists didn't do a bad job with capturing a lot of what we know to be pretty decent history along the way.
Mhm. Yeah, they really didn't. Again, Franklin's history is pretty unique, and its religious background forms it so much, uh, which I think is the main difference. Um, but really, I mean, it's quite spot on from what I'm finding, and I'm surprised by that. I guess these guys, these video game creators must have done their research, which is great.
Well, they tend to, which is one of the things I like about it. And at the same time, they develop some really neat lore and some
Hmm.
really fun stories that go with it. Which then takes me to the last thing I like to do when I can get someone who's a historian on to pick their brains. Is I like to think of myself as someone who enjoys writing as a hobby. And so whenever I play an RPG, a role playing game, I try to give my characters stories,
Hmm.
give them a reason for being there. And so with Siobhan, I've kind of created the sense of her, fleeing New York in the 1880s, just having had enough of it, needing to get away from the situation, having a thick Irish accent still, being first generation American. And so I guess my backstory question for my resident historian is, what would happen if this Irish Catholic girl had stumbled on horseback up into Frankemuth in the 1890s?
Holy, okay. So let me tell you right now, Frankemuth back then, today we're much different, I
Oh yeah,
promise.
no, no.
Back then, Frankemuth wasn't a super inclusive place if you were not German and if you were not Lutheran. For example, the insurance company that was there back then, you couldn't be insured unless you spoke German, unless you were of Lutheran faith. Kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's not to say she would be kicked out of town. She could very easily, if she had the money for it, buy land, buy a business, and be welcomed into town. But I do think she'd have a little more trouble than the average German citizen coming in and establishing a life for herself. That wasn't the Theodore Fisher that I mentioned to you. Like I said, he was a Mason. So he was a little side-eyed, I suppose, more than once. But he was, like I said, he was very accepted in town, especially in the business world. And today he's one of our most respected citizens of Frankemuth because of all the businesses and businesses he owned and all the things that he did. So.
Well, and that's the thing too, is once you kind of, there's a trend with all of this, as we mentioned earlier, where there is a concern going into a strange place. I can also see maybe Siobhan never ends up in the Frankenmuth because she rides up, she talks to two people on a farmstead and goes, yeah, no, I
Sure,
don't,
sure.
I barely speak English as most do around here. I'm not even going to try German
Yeah, yeah.
because,
And that German language went, kids were taught in the German language until the 1960s still. Meeting minutes were taken in German. Church was in German. I mean, that's just, um,
wait. So in 1960, your city council meetings were still held in German?
the minutes were written in German. Yeah, yeah.
That's kind of
So,
cool. I'm not
I
gonna
mean,
lie.
it's interesting looking through them, but we need to translate it. When we have translated them, but it's very interesting to hear see that still. And Frankemuth especially, because those original 15 settlers and the settlers that followed them came from the Franconian area of Germany, which is a little different dialect, which was a little different dialect, I should say. We call it Bayerisch today,
Okay.
and that language has evolved to very old school German. So today, it's very old school German with a little bit of English words mixed into it. So it's not the real German that they currently speak in Germany. And that started changing where the average German couldn't understand a person from Frankemuth probably in the late 1800s already. That kind of went awry. Um, so even if she did know German, I can't say she'd be able to uh, fully understand what is being said, because that language, and that's still that language island, I should say, and that's still how it is today. People in my family, for example, still speak Bayerisch, but when I took German in high school, I learned like
German.
real German, but I couldn't communicate with my dad and my grandparents because they spoke Bayerisch. So just old dialect.
I think I now have a short story germinating of that very conversation of, well, I speak enough German, I should be able to get a room for the night, and then not do anything else except cut to her walking back out of Zendler's going, yeah, no, they ain't speaking German in there. This isn't gonna work.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go
yeah.
pitch a tent. Um,
Yeah. So I mean, you could, by the time she would come in 1890s or whatever, I think there were enough people that spoke English that I think she'd be okay. Um, but
have you heard a New York Irish accent from the late 19th century?
I have not.
I'm not sure they would call that English either.
Oh,
Like, again, I can almost see that. Like, you're not speaking German. Well, you're not speaking English. I'm speaking
yeah,
fine English. I'm speaking fine German.
yeah.
And then hopefully someone leaves before someone draws a gun.
Sure, sure. Um, I mean, I would imagine if she has the money, I would imagine that any of the six hotels would allow her to at least stay. I'm sure they could figure out what she's saying and feed her horse and give her a chicken dinner and a beer for those 75 cents.
But would they have hired her?
That one,
That's okay. I mean, it's okay.
I
If the answer is no, that's perfectly fine. We're just not today.
my guess is the answer would be no.
Yeah.
Especially in back then, the hotels relied on their family. It was a family business.
Hmm.
You hired your kids worked, your wife worked in the kitchen, your
Mm-hmm.
kids washed dishes, and you took care of everything else. Um, and then when you died, your kids took over, and maybe they sold it, and then it went to another family, and then that family ran it. The Zenders, for example, that own Zender's restaurant, I mean, they're on their third generation of owners. And before that, they bought it from a family who owned it, and then they bought it. They bought that from a family who owned it. So it was, they didn't have a lot of additional employees that was outside their family. So I guess the likelihood of her getting hired would be pretty small. She might have more luck as a farmhand if that was, although she's a woman, so that might be a
That's
little
its own
race.
headache.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. Um, if she's some set of skills, there was a brewery. There's several breweries in town. Maybe she could find a job at taverns. We had hardware stores,
Okay.
milling company. It all depended on her skills. But again, the fact that she's a woman would also probably hurt her back then.
Right. And the good news, and this is one thing I've enjoyed about gaming over the years, is that while there are people who will scream about the importance of history, they also know that a modern audience enjoys inclusion.
Hmm.
And so, like, for example, in this particular game, there is, as near as I can tell so far, outside of the insults you have slinged at you, no change in gameplay based on the gender of your character.
Okay.
Now, that said, there was a case where I was playing with my wife, and she has a woman character as well, and with our friend who also is. So there were three women collecting posses, and their posse target made a comment about them needing to get themselves back to the kitchen and off their horses.
Well,
He
I
did
mean,
not. Unfortunately, there was an accident bringing him into jail.
oh,
Yeah, he fell off the horse, hit his
yeah,
head. Don't know what
that,
happened.
that happens sometimes.
Don't know what
Yeah.
happened. It was
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Yeah,
Um,
it's admittedly to a fault. Frankemuth was a little old-fashioned like that.
yeah.
The men were out on the farm, along with their sons, and the women and daughters were in the kitchen. And then, the kids went to school until eighth grade, and then when they were done with eighth grade, the boys went out to learn in the field to learn how to farm, and the girls stayed in the kitchen. That's the way it was.
Well, that's. I mean, that's the way history has played out, and we're very grateful that things have progressed over
Oh,
the years.
absolutely, absolutely.
So that's where that ends up, and it's. I know it's an awkward thing to think about that things weren't perfect as we would like them to be, through the modern prism, and
Yeah.
that makes all these conversations challenging. But I think they're good to have because it's good to think about what we've had to do to get to where we are now,
Absolutely.
so we
It's
don't
see how
forget.
far we've come. Yeah, and it really, like I mentioned, it really wasn't until the 50s, 60s, and 70s when Frankenmuth really began to open up. And now those German names that were so popular in the 1890s, there's not very many of them left anymore because new people moved in, and that's a good thing because Frankenmuth is related to one another way more than I'd like to admit because they all intermarried each other. Um, you know, Myself, again, being from Frankenmuth and German, I can look at most of the names on a wall, and I'm related to 90% of them in some way or another. So it's good that new people moved in.
Now that's not unique to everyone. My family on my mom's side makes up most of the town of Rosebush.
Okay.
So when I went to Central Michigan for college, my mom pulled down the phone book and went, well, if you ever get in trouble, here's who you call. Flip, flip, you can call them. That's your cousin. That's a cousin. That's an aunt. That's a
Yeah.
cousin. Flip, we don't like them. Don't call them. These aren't relatives, but they know you call them. And she was there for like 20 minutes. And
That's
she
great though.
left. And I told my roommates, I can't go to the bar. I want to pick up a first relation, and that's just going to get awkward.
Yeah, yeah. Especially, and that was a real concern in Frankemuth in the early 1900s. You seriously had to, consider who you were marrying and make sure you weren't related to them. And that's, uh, Frankenmuth wasn't super large, so and everybody wanted to stay in that German bubble. So as you married Germans, sooner or later you're gonna run out.
Okay, so if I were to be in Frankenmuth in my 20s in the 1890s, I'd be
Hmm.
thinking I have to go to Flint to meet a girl, and I have to make sure who I meet has enough German to her that I can bring her home and not lose my right to the family business.
Sure, that would make sense. Yeah. I mean, are you gonna go to Flint to court her? I mean, that's a good 10-hour walk.
I gotta go somewhere.
Wow.
I can't court any girls around here. They're all
That's
second
true.
cousins. And
That's
that's
true.
I had a rough enough go dating as it was. Like there's a whole night of conversations about what me high school dating was like. I couldn't imagine the added pressure of, oh yeah, and I have to walk 8 hours to pick her up for the date.
Right, right. Well, and Frankenmuth traditions, if you wanted to marry a girl, all you had to do was announce it 3 weeks in a row at a church service, and then that next Sunday you could get that. Well, I guess that fourth Sunday, I should say, you could get married. Um, and so it wasn't courting process probably wasn't really all that long, which was probably good if you were gonna see a girl from Flint. You didn't have to go down there that often. But then, once you were married, you were expected to kind of stay in Frankenmuth and stay in the Lutheran faith and raise your kids that way. And you had a big set of expectations for you. And if you didn't conform, oh boy.
No, well, I think part of those 4 weeks wasn't just so that everyone could be ready. It's so that there could be the background check and the visit and check her cooking. And is she going to,
Sure.
what's her family like? Because we're bringing them into, and it's
Yeah.
give your one aunt every excuse to find a reason not to let you go through with this.
Right.
And that's it. That's a lot of those small towns. When you started talking about those first 15 settlers coming to evangelize the Lutheran faith to the native Michiganders, and you mentioned that they'd already moved on. So was that
They
a
did.
case?
So it was in the 1819, I believe, was the very first Treaty of Saginaw, when basically the government kind of bought off the Indians. They wanted their land, and it wasn't anything. I think today we think of the government taking Indians' land, and we look at that as we think of the Trail of Tears or something like that. In this, while that was all horrible, in Frankenmuth's or in this area's case, it wasn't. The Indians were on the verge of leaving anyway for better hunting grounds. So some moved down to the Chesaning area, but then the big majority moved up to Mount Pleasant at the reservation, and they were paid really heavily for moving off that land. And then so the settlers bought their land from the government, and they paid a little extra for it because it used to be Indian land.
Okay.
Yeah, so there were, I think, within the first couple years, they maybe baptized 13 Indian children. Just the couple of Indians that were still around, and there were Indians in the area up until the 1920s. I believe 1923 was when the last one in Frankenmuth Township passed away. Um, so
So it's almost like we had a plan.
yeah,
Can't do that.
yeah,
Need a backup plan.
pretty much. So at that point, they were just kind of here to remain German. They had three other sister colonies that followed them. So there was Frankenmuth, Frankentrost, which followed in 1847, Frankenlust, which is up by Bay City area,
Okay.
and that followed in 1849, and then Frankenhilf, which turned into Richville in 1850. And
Okay.
the other three settlements aren't anywhere near as large as Frankenmuth. They consist of all churches, all schools, maybe a bar. There's a meat market in Richville. Um,
Hmm.
they're kind of just towns you drive by and you see a sign.
I
So,
mean, that's something. I was wondering if oh, now I just lost the name of it because I was well, Frankemuth, but it's not Frankemuth. Frankfurt,
oh, okay. That's
way up there.
Yeah, nope, nothing to do with us. But I believe they're from, the settlers were from Germany. That Frank is usually where they came from. Franconia, that
Oh,
region of
okay.
Franconia in Germany. Um, so yeah, so and all the other colonies followed. Again, not only just to uh, teach the word of God to Indians if there were any in the area, but also just to kind of have a little oh camaraderie with their fellow sister colonies, and then kind of stayed German in that area. Um, and and all of them at one point were pretty successful. Frankentrost, for example, it had a plank road going through it at one time, which was a really big deal. Um, that ran from Saginaw to Vassar. It had a cheese factory. It had a general store. It had a bar.
Hmm.
I mean, it was quite a booming area. And then almost everything got destroyed by fire at one point or another. Like we had mentioned, the joys of electricity of having electricity or outweigh the joys of not. But and now it's just an area that you drive through.
Oh, yeah, and
But
home.
my home, that's where I reside in Frankentrost.
Cool.
Um, yeah. What is it? I'm on my sixth generation Frankentroster. So from Germany, which I'm proud to say.
That is a
So
lineage. Yeah,
yeah.
we should have opened with that. I feel bad that we buried the lead tonight.
Well, yeah. Well, there you go. There it is.
I feel bad for
So
whoever interviewed opposite you for the director job because I can imagine say this. So where are you from? Around here? For how long? Sixth generation, and I'm out.
yeah. It was actually a pretty so my I'm married. My married name is Chapman. So it was kind of a big deal when I did get this job. I had some people recommend to me that I should go back to my maiden name because it sounds more German than Chapman does. So I did not, obviously, that I didn't. I know I was proud to take my husband's name. But so some of those staying German ideals are still in Frankemuth today by a couple older folks that are proud of their heritage and want to keep it alive as much as possible. So can't fault them too much.
Well, and my children both do Irish step dance, so there's always a little bit of that, keeping the traditions from our home countries, as it were, alive. That makes
Yeah,
things kind of fun.
yeah, it does. I mean, we do stuff like that. Christmas time, we hang a pickle on a Christmas tree. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
We have a
Um,
pickle.
yep, do the pickle. Bake all the German cookies, Springerly. Oh goodness, Eisenkekely, which is kind of like a fried donut thing.
I'd be down with that, but I have a relative who's Polish, and she makes these. They're called angel wings,
Oh, yep.
and those are just. I used to get sick. I'd eat so many of them in one sitting because I didn't know how to stop.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So,
there might be some good stuff there, but the Poles have the best cookies.
yeah. So in fact, one of the galleries in our museum right now, it discusses Frankemuth traditions.
Hmm.
So it was a lot of fun coming up with stuff that Frankemuthers do yearly. Um, and to us, it's like, well, yeah, that's just what you do. Where our one of our staff people, she's not from here, so for example, when we told her about the Pelsnickel, which is basically like an angry Santa Claus who like comes and takes
Mm-hmm.
naughty kids away. She was
Mm-hmm.
like, "Are you serious? What's wrong with you people that you did that?" But to us, that's just like, well, yeah, he comes and visits you every Christmas, and you need to be good, or else he's gonna take you away in his bag, and you're never gonna see him again. Um, that's just it's kind of funny.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. When you're 6, getting a lump of coal isn't the scariest thing in the world.
Right? Yeah, it's
If
not
you're
a very big threat.
if you're gonna go for a threat, you got to go big or go home.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
My parents didn't practice that, but my grandparents did. So my dad remembers it was his uncle that would come and dress up in a Santa suit. Well, it was like a fur coat and the beard, and my dad would hide under the bed, terrified, and his uncle would just sit there at the kitchen table and drink beer, as his angry Santa Claus.
well, and you had mentioned some things at the museum, and when we started off, we were talking a little bit about to kind of bring it back to the museum as like our linchpin tonight. One of the things that I like about doing these presentations on Twitch is that we have this interactivity with the audience, where when they type in things in chat, it shows up on the screen. They can make emojis fly across, and they can technically, if anyone spends their channel points, they can actually make me change how I'm sitting or put a flag up
Oh,
behind myself.
okay.
Well, not technically, but they can spend points towards these, which is a big part of the streaming community, because we know that the more engaged people are, the more likely they are to hang around.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's something I'm assuming you've picked up with the museum. I was wondering if there were any particular parts of the museum that you're like really proud, where that's like, this is the best thing to do in here because you get in and you get to do this thing that's fun to do, and it's part of our experience.
Sure. So we have a couple of different aspects that I'm fairly proud of. One of them that's kind of on a hiatus right now due to the pandemic. Our exhibits are very hands-on, and I've always been very proud of that because, you can, like our very first exhibit, or I'm sorry, our very first gallery. There's a board where you choose your decisions in life. So um, and you get on the ship to go to America, and you can pick option A, B, C, or D, and then you lift them up, and it says, go to Frankemuth, Michigan, or stay in New York, or whatever, and and it basically it shows you how decisions will dictate your life, and most of them end in you die early because of some sickness or something like that, but that was reality.
Yep.
Um, and again, a lot of our things are hands-on, and it's simple stuff as simple as a checkerboard game in Gallery 5, where you can play checkers because that's what people did at general stores, because it was beyond a store. It was also a gathering place that people spent a significant amount of time at, late 1800s. So I've always been very proud of that. That is on a hiatus because of COVID. You're not supposed to touch things. Another thing I'm always really proud of is our education programs. We offer to all ages. We focus mostly on kids, on the elderly, and individuals with disabilities. We are always open to just general groups wanting to come in and learn, though. We have a log house that was built in 1857, I believe, which is it's located in Cross Park, which is right across the road from Brunner's. Um, and it was a log house that was found just outside of Frankentrost, so a couple, maybe 7 miles outside of Frankemuth. And the guy that found it didn't realize it was a log house because it had been sided up.
Oh,
So he was going to remodel it one day. And he took the siding off, and he's like, "Holy cow! There's real logs here!" And sure enough, it was a log house. So he donated it to the historical museum, and we set it up in Cross Park, and we use that for education programs. And it's a completely authentic log house. Um, so, and we call it house, not cabin, because it has a second story. It has an upstairs window, which is a pretty big deal. So we use that for an education tool. We tin punch, we dip candles, we make butter,
oh yeah.
we baked in the oven before. We've done apple pressing. We have a garden out there that shows, what you would eat if you had a fever and things like that. And I'm so proud of that building because that's a real deal. Not only was there a real family that lived there in that log house at one point in time, but now we're able to use it and share, you know, um, what did you do when you had to take a bath? Because we have a bathtub, and you shared the water with everybody in your family, and the water always got cold and got dirty, and um, stuff like that. So that's the education of our museum is something I'm most proud about, because our mission is to preserve, communicate, and celebrate history, and we work really hard at doing all of that.
Well, you're very gifted at the communication piece, and I can tell that you're celebrating history is just natural to you. So all we gotta do is just keep with the preservation part, and you've nailed your mission.
Yeah, yeah, we're working on. We just surpassed 30,000 artifacts in our museum. So and it's an ongoing project, especially during the pandemic, during the shutdown. People were cleaning out their attics and their basements, and oh my goodness, the stuff that we got was great. Our collections manager is a little overwhelmed at the moment, but it's good job security. It's okay.
Yeah, no, and you can be amazed what you can find. I still recall, and it's not related to Frankemuth per se, but when I ran the Living History Club, I had a student who had discovered a flintlock pistol in her grandfather's attic. which itself would have been an amazing thing to have found, except that she brought it to school
Oh,
to show me to say, what should I do with this?
yeah.
And all I could think is, get it back out of the school.
No kidding. Oh my god.
Ah! I mean, though, granted, I doubt anyone would think she was planning anything major with it since it was a
Well,
single
sure.
shot flintlock without a flint in it. But still.
So just a general image of that, yeah. Um, that's the fun part is stuff that you just find that maybe the person that donated it didn't really know was history or didn't know was a highly coveted item. We have people coming in all the time saying, "Well, I'm going to throw this out unless you guys want it," and it's something that's been on our wish list for years. And it's like, "You guys, no, don't throw it out."
No, no, no.
Um,
No, no.
yeah,
Bring it
so
here. Bring it here.
we have stories like that all the time, and just really neat stuff.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And I'm hoping that for anyone that's in the Michigan area that can get up and visit, I do consider Frankemuth one of my favorite places to go. Even if it's just driving through town and grabbing dinner before we continue up to my parents have a cottage over at Thompsonville. So we go up 75 and then we jog.
Yeah.
And it's not that far off 75 and it's such a great little town. And it's been fun to visit when we can visit for a longer stretch because it's not just shopping, but there's the museum there. There's a lot of cultural opportunities, a lot of tours. The horse-drawn carriages are kind of always just a nice way to relax. And
Yeah.
and the people who manage that do an amazing job, I think, of keeping their drivers trained in local history and local trivia because there's all kinds of neat little tidbits that get thrown out when you ride through town, which is also
Yeah.
fun.
A lot of businesses actually utilize us. Once a year, they send their new hires or new interns through, and those employees are requested to take notes. So we'll give them a tour, which is always great. The fact that the businesses respect their history too, because it's they're in town. So that's great. It's really the locals especially are always big history nuts about it because it's their history, but the businesses themselves too are super receptive, and always really great about wanting to know our story.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking some time tonight to sit down with me and push through the technical issues and the scheduling issues and hang out. It's fun to get someone on here to talk.
Yeah.
It's my hobby. It's your passion. And it's fun to get in and have these conversations. We could go all night, but we probably shouldn't because you have a remodeling project you're still in the middle of.
We do. Yeah, we currently only have a shower in our bathroom and that's it. So it's not a big deal to walk upstairs to go to the bathroom, but it's kind of a pain in the butt because it's a bunch of stairs. But
So I do want to thank you for coming out tonight and being part of this. In the chat, the bot has just put up again I'm going to do it again on my end. I'm going to cue the. There it is. I'm going to just hide myself for a second. And we gained some thank yous from the chat. Geeky and Nebula both have said thank you for coming out tonight. Nebula is an amazing streamer, by the way. If you don't follow her streams, you absolutely should. She has been a huge friend to this particular stream and this particular streamer. So I do have to take the time to say thank you to her. And again, if you ever think you want to watch video game streams, I highly recommend that's the one you start with. Don't start with me. I am. Don't start with me, but she's the
okay.
one you want to start with. So thank you for coming out tonight. It's been a lot of fun. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and roll the end credits.
Okay.
Give us some.
I just wanted to say also
Go.
thank you for having me. I so appreciate it. This is when you first reached out, I was like, wait, what does he want to do? But this has been a blast. And I mean, there's again being from Frankemuth, there's nothing I love more than talking about my own history. So you let me do that, which I really appreciate. So hopefully you guys are interested in it, and if you ever think of anything else, I'd love to come back.
Well, absolutely. Well, I actually see Bubba Fett just popped into chat. So I have a feeling we're going to have to acquire some questions and maybe
Okay.
do like a combination of pre-planned questions and some Ask Me Anythings
Absolutely.
and see
That'd
what
be
that
great.
turns into, which you should brace yourself because sometimes people are very happy to do all kinds of fun questions.
That's all right. I will do my best.
All right. Well, thanks everybody who popped into the chat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to roll our end show video. And I'm going to see where I can send you guys to hang out unless you tell me quickly where you want me to throw you guys. because the people I would usually throw you to are currently here watching. So I'm going to see if there's anybody we can raid. And then thank you again, Heidi, for coming on. I appreciate this. I'm glad we had a good time. And I'm looking forward to our next get together because I think
Yeah.
we have one on the books to actually go up into the museum
Mhm.
and do some fun stuff there. And then again, we might do a Q&A, or we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it, Rob.
All right. Well, everybody else, wherever you are, just make sure that you have a chance to study your history, read up, and as always, please, please stay safe.